The town appeared normal at first glance, a cluster of neat houses, trimmed gardens, and cobblestone streets glistening under the late afternoon sun. But as soon as Michael stepped off the train, he felt it, an unsettling air, a quietness that wasn't calm but calculated. He adjusted his backpack and started walking toward the town square, noticing that every resident he passed seemed off. They were all unnaturally youthful. Children ran past, yet their faces carried lines of worry. Elderly women moved with the spring of 20-year-olds, yet their eyes held stories decades old. Men in the streets laughed and spoke with wisdom beyond their apparent years. Michael felt a chill. There was no one in the town who looked exactly like they should. He checked into a small inn at the edge of the square, run by a woman who appeared in her 30s, yet spoke with the gravitas of someone who had seen lifetimes. "You'll enjoy our town," she said, her smile warm but oddly hollow. "It's timeless here." Michael nodded politely, pretending to understand, though a pit of unease had formed in his stomach. That evening, curiosity drew him to the center of the town. The streets emptied strangely early, and the sound of soft footsteps echoed as the sun dipped below the horizon. Michael noticed a faint light spilling from the local church, its doors ajar. Hesitating, he approached. Inside, shadows moved under flickering candlelight. Figures gathered in the pews, whispering and muttering prayers, or were they chants? Their voices were layered, as though a dozen years of agony were compressed into each syllable. Michael stepped closer, heart hammering. The closer he got, the heavier the air became, thick with incense and something else, something metallic, like old blood. He tried to leave, but the door slammed shut with an invisible force, trapping him inside. Panic clawed at him. The townspeople, so impossibly young yet so old, turned their gaze toward him. Their eyes were hollow wells, reflecting decades of experience in a single glance. A deep, resonating moan filled the church, vibrating through Michael's chest. He stumbled backward, tripping over a pew, and fell to the cold stone floor. The moaning intensified, blending with whispers and laughter that carried a terrifying weight. Each second stretched unnaturally. The air felt as if it were bending time itself around him. When he tried to scream, the sound caught in his throat. Then it stopped. Silence, thick, suffocating silence. Michael crawled toward the nearest exit, shaking. He'd burst out into the night air, gasping as if he'd been underwater for hours. The streets were empty now, as if the town itself exhaled after some unseen ritual. But something was wrong. His legs ached as though he had run for miles. His mind weighed down with memories he couldn't recall living. The town's magic, or curse, had touched him. Michael returned to the inn, collapsed onto the bed, and fell into a restless sleep. But the sleep was not rest. He dreamed of decades compressed into moments, births, deaths, losses, triumphs, all rushing past in a torrent of experience he couldn't process. And through it all, the townspeople watched, their faces serene, unmoved, timeless. When he woke, the sun was climbing over the horizon, casting soft golden light across the square. Michael felt different. Older, yet unchanged. He ran his hands over his face, expecting the wrinkles of decades. There were none. And yet, in his mind, he carried the exhaustion of a lifetime condensed into a single night. Michael stumbled out of the inn and onto the quiet streets, the morning light giving the town an almost serene appearance. But serenity was a lie. Each step he took felt heavier, as if invisible chains weighed him down. Memories of the night before, or what felt like decades, swirled in his mind. Faces, voices, moments he had never lived yet, somehow remembered. He approached the church again, drawn by a force he could not name. The doors were closed this time, ordinary, unassuming. But a faint hum emanated from within, a vibration that seemed to call to his very bones. Michael pressed his hand against the wood. The surface was warm, pulsing, alive. Suddenly, the air around him thickened. The voices returned, not whispering, but clear, insistent, layered over one another in a chorus that spoke directly to his mind. "You belong with us." The words echoed like a chant, repeating endless. He tried to pull away, but his feet would not obey. A memory, or was it a vision, flashed before him. A man, decades younger, stepping into the town for the first time. The same awe, the same horror, then a fleeting smile from the townspeople, and the man never aged. Time here did not flow. It bent, stretched, and folded, feeding on the life of those who lingered too long. Michael realized with a sinking horror that the town did not grant youth. It borrowed it, storing decades in each resident in exchange for the cost of lived years compressed into unbearable nights. The church doors creaked open on their own, revealing the congregation inside. Candlelight danced across faces that should have been familiar yet were impossibly perfect in youth. Their eyes, pools of endless memory, turned to him. Michael's heart pounded as a cold truth sank into his chest. Every smile hid decades of stolen life. Every laugh was a mask for unending torment. He tried to run, but the ground beneath him shifted, elongating the streets, twisting them into impossible angles. Shadows stretched and twisted into forms that whispered his name. He could feel decades of exhaustion pressing on his body, though his reflection in a nearby window showed a young man. Michael realized then that, in this town, time was not measured in hours or years. It was measured in experience, consumed and recycled, leaving the body untouched while the mind aged in torment. Desperate, he sprinted toward the train station. The familiar clatter of rails and the distant whistle of an approaching train should have been a relief. But the town was relentless. The streets morphed, the houses shifted like living things, blocking his path. The faces in the windows smiled knowingly. You can leave, but you cannot escape what you have seen. Finally, breath ragged, heart pounding, he stumbled onto the platform. The train roared in, a blur of motion and light. Michael dove inside, collapsing into a seat as the door slammed shut. The town receded in the distance, quaint and innocent in the sunlight. But Michael knew the truth. Though he had left physically, the night had left its mark. In a single evening, he had lived decades, felt the weight of countless years compressed into one unending stretch of terror and revelation. His body remained young, but his mind carried the burdens of a lifetime. And sometimes, when he closed his eyes at night, he could still hear the whispers, the moans from the church, and the timeless eyes of the townspeople, watching, waiting, forever young, forever old, forever hungry for the years of anyone foolish enough to visit. The town wasn't even marked on the map. Driving late at night, with their phones losing signal and the highway stretching endlessly, the four friends Evan, Claire, Marcus, and Lily were relieved when they spotted a gas station glowing faintly in the distance. The attendant was an older man with a voice that carried something like warning in every word. He told them the station closed after midnight and that there were no motels nearby. "You might as well keep driving," he said, almost pleading. But exhaustion won. Claire spotted a cluster of houses beyond the gas station, lined up like teeth in the darkness. "There," she insisted. "People live here. Someone might rent a room." As they drove closer, they realized the town felt strangely suspended, as if no one had decided whether it was alive or abandoned. Windows glowed, but streets were empty. Shadows stretched long and still, and then they saw it. At the far edge of the town stood a house larger than the rest, its windows blazing with an unnatural yellow light. Every pane glowed, every curtain drawn back as though the house wanted to be watched. "That's odd," Marcus muttered. "Even stranger, the closer they got, the quieter everything became. No insects, no distant car, not even the hum of the wind. Just that steady, unblinking glow. When Evan knocked, the door swung open with a sigh. No one answered. The inside was still, dusty, untouched. Dust covered the furniture, yet the air smelled faintly of fresh wax, as if someone had polished everything only hours before. On the mantel sat framed photographs, people smiling, people waving, children holding balloons. Claire froze. "These are the people we just passed," she whispered. She picked up one frame, her hand trembling. It was the same gas station attendant, younger, standing beside a car that didn't look more than 5 years old. "That can't be right," Lily whispered. "He's old, much older." More frames lined the hallway, and in every one they recognized faces: the man sweeping his porch, the woman walking her dog, the children who had stared silently as they drove past. All captured in images that looked like they had been taken decades earlier. The friends should have left. They told themselves to go. But the glowing light in the house seemed to throb faintly, like a heartbeat, urging them deeper. The kitchen clock ticked loudly, though the hands never moved. A hallway mirror reflected them slightly wrong, their movements lagging a second too late, their expressions faintly distorted. Claire gripped Evan's arm. "We need to leave. Now." And when they did, stepping back onto the street, the world had changed. The town was gone. No houses, no streets, no distant station. Just an endless field of black soil stretching in every direction. And behind them the house, standing solitary, its windows blazing brighter than ever, as if mocking their attempt to escape. The door creaked open again. This time, they didn't wait for an invitation. Evan turned in circles, his chest tight, his breath shallow. This can't be real. The whole town just gone. But the others saw it too. Nothing but an ocean of black earth beneath the starless sky, and the house behind them burning with impossible light. Marcus swallowed hard. It's like it followed us. Or everything else disappeared. They backed away, their footsteps crunching unnaturally loud on soil that didn't feel like dirt at all, more like fine ash. Yet no matter how far they walked, the house never shrank in the distance. Its windows still glared at them, a beacon they could not escape. Finally, Claire stopped. "We're not leaving it behind," she whispered. "We're walking in circles." And then something else appeared. Ahead of them, half buried in the ground, was a photograph. Claire bent down, brushing away the ash. Her own face stared back at her from the frame. Behind her in the picture stood Evan, Marcus, and Lily, smiling stiffly, as though frozen in a memory none of them recalled. The photo looked old, too old. Evan yanked it from her hands and tossed it aside. No, this is some trick." But more frames dotted the soil around them, emerging like bones in a graveyard. Each one contained their faces in different scenes. Sitting in the gas station, walking past the silent houses, stepping inside the glowing doorway. Events they had lived only minutes before, already captured, already preserved. Lily covered her mouth. "It's recording us." A wind rose suddenly, pulling them back toward the house, even though the air remained deathly still. The front door stood open wider now, and within, the glow pulsed rhythmically like breath. Marcus shook his head. "I'm not going back in there." But when he tried to run, his body froze mid-step. His legs locked, his arms stiffened, and his head snapped toward the house as if invisible strings had caught him. His mouth opened in a silent scream as he was dragged backward across the soil. Evan and Claire rushed to pull him free, but their hands passed through him as if his skin were smoke. Marcus's body dissolved into streaks of light, absorbed by the doorway, until nothing was left. Lily collapsed to her knees, sobbing, "We're next. It's taking us." Claire clenched her fists, forcing her voice steady. "No, it wants us inside. That's where it ends." The three stepped back into the house together. The dust was gone. The rooms were furnished, spotless, as though prepared for guests. Laughter echoed faintly from the walls, distorted, like a recording played backward. Shadows drifted across the ceiling without a source. At the center of the living room stood a table with a single photo frame resting on it. Inside was a new picture. The four of them sat together on the very couch before them, smiling woodenly. Marcus was there too, though his eyes were strangely hollow, the irises faded to pale gray. Evan's throat tightened. "This is wrong. We're still alive. We're not." The bulbs overhead flickered, and suddenly the image inside the frame shifted. Their smiles widened unnaturally. Their bodies leaned closer together. Their faces blurred, then sharpened again, as though the photograph were rewriting itself moment by moment. The walls groaned. The house hummed. And then the front door slammed shut. They ran. Up the staircase, down twisting halls, but every door opened back into the same living room, the same photo waiting on the table, their likenesses becoming less human with each return. Lily pressed her palms against her ears. "It won't let us leave," the house answered with another pulse of light, brighter, blinding. When it dimmed, only silence remained. The photo on the table was complete now, 4 figures frozen forever inside the frame, their faces smiling with lifeless calm. Outside, the house stood solitary under a starless sky, its windows glowing warmly, as though inviting the next traveler to step inside. And in the distance, faintly, a town shimmered back into being quiet streets, glowing windows, familiar faces waiting, as though nothing had ever happened. I arrived at the little town just before dusk, dragging my suitcase along the uneven cobblestones. It wasn't a place I had planned to visit. My train had broken down earlier in the day, and a detour had brought me here, to this cluster of old houses leaning against one another like tired men at a bar. I only intended to stay the night before continuing on my way. The innkeeper pointed me toward the town's central square, saying it was the heart of their community. "If you want to feel the spirit of this place, stand there for a while," he told me. His tone was neither warm nor inviting, more like a warning disguised as a suggestion. The square opened up suddenly, after a series of narrow streets. In its center stood a fountain, its water trickling faintly under the fading light. Behind it loomed the town hall with a clock tower rising high above the rooftops. The clock face was weathered, its hands fixed stubbornly at a single moment, 3:15. I stood there for a while, puzzled. The town moved around me, vendors packing up their stalls, children tugging at their mothers' sleeves, but the clock remained frozen, indifferent to the activity below. Later that evening, after settling into my small rented room, I leaned out the window to watch the square again. A faint unease tugged at me, though I couldn't explain why. The streets were still, yet I felt as if the entire town was loosening, waiting. Then the bells began to ring. I froze. The sound rolled across the rooftops, low and heavy. The clock tower was chiming the hour, though its hands hadn't moved an inch from 3:15. 1, 2, 3. The sound was strangely hollow, echoing as if it had passed through a vast cavern rather than an open square. With each strike, something changed. At the first chime, a group of children who had been playing near the fountain simply vanished. Not ran away, not hid, just gone, like the air had swallowed them. At the second chime, two men chatting near the corner of a cafe flickered like candle flames and dissolved into nothingness. By the third chime, I realized I was gripping the windowsill with both hands, breath shallow, as more people disappeared. Stall owners, passers-by, even a stray dog curled near a lamp-post, all of them were erased by the bell's rhythm. The square emptied with each toll. The silence that followed each chime grew thicker, pressing against my ears. By the time the final echo died, I was staring at an empty plaza bathed in moonlight. The clock tower loomed, its frozen hands pointing to 3:15, as though mocking me. I shut the window, heart pounding, and told myself I had been tired, imagining things. Perhaps I had dozed off at the windowsill. Perhaps the wine I drank at dinner had gone to my head, but the unease clung to me. I barely slept. Each time I closed my eyes, I dreamt of the square, echoing and hollow, the fountain's water trickling in a place where no one lived anymore. I dreamt of footsteps circling me, though no one was there. When I finally drifted into a deeper sleep, I awoke again to the sound of bells. I checked the clock on the wall above the bed, 3:15. Dragging myself back to the window, I looked out, and once again the square lay beneath me, empty, silent, frozen. But this time, I felt it, not absence, but attention. The square was not abandoned, it was watching me. I stumbled back from the window, my breath fogging the glass. For a long time, I didn't move. The bells no longer rang, but their aftertaste lingered in the air like a metallic hum, vibrating in my chest. I told myself morning would come, and everything would be normal again. People would return, and the square would bustle with noise and life. But when morning came, something was wrong. The air outside my window was sharp and clear, too crisp, as if freshly made. The rooftops glistened with dew. I leaned out and froze. The square was full again, vendors, children, townsfolk. But their clothes were strange, outdated, heavy fabrics, wide skirts, tall hats. The fountain in the center was not cracked and mossy as I had seen it yesterday, but pristine and new, its water sparkling in the sunlight. I glanced up at the clock tower. Its hands pointed to 3:15. The people moved through the square as if I weren't there. Their conversations were muted, distant, as though I were listening through water. When I called out, no one looked up. They brushed past me without so much as a glance, their eyes vacant, their movements precise like actors repeating a scene for the 1,000th time. I stepped onto the square, trying to convince myself it was simply a festival or reenactment. Perhaps the town had an unusual tradition, but then I noticed details that froze the breath in my lungs. A woman in a heavy gray dress walked past me, a wicker basket hooked in her arm. Her skin was pale, her lips cracked. She blinked slowly, too slowly, like a marionette unsure of its strings. A child skipped nearby, laughing, but the sound came a second late, not quite aligned with the motion of his mouth. And over everything, the clock tower loomed. 3:15. The bells did not ring, but I could feel their rhythm inside my chest, a phantom heartbeat that didn't belong to me. I tried to leave. I followed an alley away from the square, certain that if I had just kept walking, I'd find the road leading out of town. But the streets twisted, folding back onto themselves. I turned corners only to end up at the fountain again, staring at the same vendors, the same woman in gray, the same child skipping with that delayed laughter. Time was not moving here. It was circling. Hours passed at least, that's what I thought. The sun froze high above, casting the same shadow from the fountain's rim. My watch refused to tick forward. My body ached with hunger, but the bread on the vendor's stalls was stiff as stone, as though it had been sculpted rather than baked. Then at nightfall the bells rang again. 1, 2, 3. The sound shook the air, bending it. The people on the square froze in place. One by one they began to fade. The child first, then the woman in gray, then the vendors. Their outlines blurred until only pale smudges remained. The fountain slowed, its water thickening into a still, glassy sheet. By the final chime, I was alone. The square stretched around me in silence. The clock tower's face glowed faintly in the moonlight. Its hands hadn't moved still, forever. 3:15. A whisper slipped through the air, though I saw no lips move. It came from everywhere and nowhere, brushing the back of my neck. You stayed too long. I spun, but no one was there. My own shadow lay at my feet, warped and stretched toward the fountain. The world shuddered. The cobblestones rippled like water. My body felt heavy, pulled downward, as if the square itself were swallowing me. I stumbled, tried to run, but the edges of the square bent inward like the closing of a book. Darkness folded over me. When I woke, the square was alive again. The fountain sparkled, the sun painted the rooftops in warm gold, and townsfolk moved cheerfully through the marketplace. For one blissful moment, I believed it had all been a dream. Then I noticed their clothes again. Not the gray and brown of yesterday, but something older still. Broad coats, lace collars, high boots. The fountain was no longer pristine marble, but carved stone, rougher, unfinished. And above me, the clock tower loomed. Its hands, 3:15. I felt the weight of centuries pressing down on me. I was not in the same town as yesterday, or perhaps I was, but peeled back, layer by layer, into its past. A child tugged at her mother's hand, and for the briefest moment her eyes flicked toward me, not blank, not hollow, but aware. She whispered something I barely caught. Another one. My knees weakened. The bells would strike again. The people would vanish again. And when the square refilled, it would not be with this century or the last, but with something older, stranger. And I would still be here, pulled deeper each time into the endless spiral of 3:15. I turned toward the road out of town, desperate, ready to run no matter how many times it twisted back. But then I saw it, the shadows lengthening unnaturally fast, sliding ahead of the sun, racing toward the center of the square. The clock tower groaned. The bells began to swing. 1, 2, 3. The world went silent. And I understood at last. There was no leaving. The square did not belong to time. Time belonged to the square, and so did I.